Wittgenstein only published the Tractatus in his life, plus a couple of other papers. The Tractatus was good enough to get him a chair at the University of Cambridge, and he spent the rest of his life working on other writing other works of his, which were never published during his lifetime, and which started to be published only after he passed away in 1951, beginning with Philosophical Investigations, which was published in 1953, in which he provides a revision and a broadening of this original idea he put forth in the Tractatus. The members of the so-called Vienna Circle or Wiener Kreis, that would give rise later on to a very important philosophical movement, which I shall deal with now, called logical positivism, based their reflections, their theories on Wittgenstein's Tractatus, but completely rejected what Wittgenstein published or what Wittgenstein's heir published after his death. So they completely rejected this idea that he was actually interested in the mystic that lied underneath the cloth, that lied beyond the barriers of our language, and focused completely on the first 6 propositions and their corollaries in the Tractatus. They indeed were interested in Wittgenstein's analysis of language, and their aim was to build on this theory to provide a better answer to the original question, the question from which we started: how to react to the collapse of the edifice of science, how to provide science with firmer grounds, with more solid foundations. Who were these people? Who were the members of the so-called Wiener Kreis or Vienna Circle? They were a group of philosophers and scientists that actually met beginning with in the first few years of the 20th century in the basement of the University of Vienna. They were more or less private meetings of friends and colleagues who discussed the recent developments in the physical sciences and also the possible philosophical interpretations of some consequences of the new physics. The group had these early stages at the beginning of the century, as I said, but these meetings changed completely in 1922, the very year in which the Tractatus was published, because in 1922, Moritz Schlick was appointed to the chair of Naturphilosophie, which would later become philosophy of the inductive sciences, at the University of Vienna. So Moritz Schlick, who was a well-known physicist at the time, or who provided, for example, an exposition of Einstein's theory of relativity, which received Einstein's applause, for example, Schlick was appointed to this chair at the University of Vienna. And the Tractatus, he was appointed in 1922. The Tractatus was the latest book, the novelty, the important book that just came out in the press. And so Schlick got a copy of the book and started reading it, and was really fascinated by this very peculiar book. And so he started also Schlick started having some private meetings in his own house, very close to the Belvedere in Vienna. If you go to the Belvedere, you walk along outside it, there's a street called Prinz Eugen Strasse. And alongside this street, just opposite to the Belvedere, you may see, if you go there, a plaque on the wall marking the place where Schlick apartment was, and where these meetings, these first really organized meetings of the Vienna Circle first took place. So the Vienna Circle started meeting on a regular basis in Wittgenstein's own, in Schlick's own house. So it was a private meeting. Between 1924 and 1928, it was generally referred to as Schlick's private circle. Whereas beginning with 1928 up until 1934, the Schlick private circle moved back to the University of Vienna and received a more official name, Verein Ernst Mach, or Ernst Mach Circle. And the people involved in these meetings started being institutionalized, so to say. So they started publishing their own series of books, the Schriften zur wissenschaftliche Weltauffassung, published by Springer, and then they had their own journal, Erkenntnis. In 1929, they published their own manifesto, the so-called Manifesto of the Vienna Circle, or the Manifesto of Logical Positivism, titled Wissenschaftliche Weltauffassung, der Wiener Kreis. And they started to get in touch also with other people outside the city of Vienna. So prominent members of the Vienna Circles are, for example, Rudolf Carnap, Otto Neurath, Hans Hahn, famous mathematician, Friedrich Waismann, Edgar Zilsel, Herbert Feigl, Philipp Frank, Karl Menger, the economist, Richard von Mises, and so on. Plus, they got in touch with other scholars from Berlin, for example. I'm talking about, thinking about Hans Reichenbach, for example, or Carl Gustav Hempel. They had students coming from abroad, from the United States, for example, to study with them. It's a case of Willard van Orman Quine, the famous Harvard logician that would later become famous professor at Harvard, professor of logic at Harvard, Charles Morris, they were another prominent American philosopher. They were in touch with the members of the so-called Polish logic school and so on. So they became really an established and organized philosophical movement. What was their idea? Their idea was to base or to answer the question how to provide scientific knowledge with more solid foundations by developing or improving on Wittgenstein's attempt. Wittgenstein focused on language, as we said. The way to prevent the edifice of science from collapsing in the future is to clean its language from all sorts of elements that ended up being included in the sciences, in the language of science, but were not actually were not pertaining to the language of science in the first place. So we have to analyze language, Wittgenstein said, from the logical point of view, and clean its language, the language of science, from these elements, purified. In this way, Wittgenstein said, problems will not be solved, but they will simply dissolve. Wittgenstein famously claimed that there are no real philosophical problems. The only problems we are facing are due to the fact that we are using language in a bad way, in the wrong way. So as soon as we analyze our language or the science, the language of science from the logical point of view and clean it up, reject all those statements without any sense, then our problems will be clarified and will be solved, or, as he said, dissolved, because there are no real problems, but only language problems. The logical positivists did not entirely agree on that, but thought that Wittgenstein's proposal for a reform or an analysis of language was worth considering, and started to build on that. So they came up with just as Wittgenstein provided a distinction between what has sense and what does not have sense, they wanted to provide a criterion by which to sharply distinguish between proper science and pseudoscience. And being based on Wittgenstein's own analysis, the criterion provided by logical positivists was a criterion of meaning, which means that whatever is science can be properly labeled as science, is meaningful, has a meaning. Whatever lies outside science, whatever, is not even worth talking about. It's completely worthless. It doesn't have any meaning. It's pseudoscience. Later on, they called it metaphysics. It's not science. It's not worth talking about. So they offered a criterion to divide science, meaning what has sense, from pseudoscience, what is nonsense. And their criterion is the famous criterion of verification. A theory or a hypothesis has a meaning, is scientific, if and only if it may be verified by experience. So we come up with a theory or a hypothesis, and then we look at the world, we look at reality. We test it. If this hypothesis or theory passes the test, if it is confirmed or verified by experience, then the theory is scientific, or the hypothesis is scientific. If, by contrast, it's not supported by empirical evidence, and is not confirmed or verified by experience, then we have to reject it. It's not part of science. It's not part of something we can actually properly talk about. There is much more to that. Logical positivism was a very complex and rich intellectual context. They came up, this is possibly their most famous achievement, this phrasing of a so-called criterion of meaning, distinguishing science from pseudoscience, but they did much more than that. For example, and it is, they provided a very open intellectual environment in which not only people close to them, but also critics of them were able to discuss, to dialogue with them, but also to publish their own works. And it's worth noticing that in this series I mentioned earlier, the Schriften zur wissenschaftlichen Weltauffassung, which published only 10 volumes, because in the early 30s, of course, the Vienna Circle had to slow down, and due to political reasons, of course, think of what was going on in Austria and in Vienna in the early 30s, leading up to the Anschluss in 1937, I think it was, or 38. By the way, Schlick himself was murdered on the flight of stairs that still leads up to the Department of Philosophy at the University of Vienna. He was shot dead by one of his students, former students, who actually claimed that he got rid of a Jewish professor. So the climate Schlick was not a Jew, but this is telling of the climate that Vienna was breathing, so to say, in those years. So after Schlick's death in 1936, and even before that, the circle dismantled. Most of its members were of Jewish origin and had to flee from the city of Vienna. Some went to England, some others, through the help of their own former students and pupils, such as Quine, ended up with positions at American universities. I'm thinking of the University of Los Angeles, for example, or University of Chicago, thereby enriching the philosophical environment across the ocean, but of course, leaving the country. And so the Vienna Circle, as was known back then, ended basically with Schlick's murder in 1936, and some of its members, for example, Gustav Bergman, actually ended up being killed in Auschwitz. So it was a very sad end of a very challenging and interesting movement, which, as I was saying, provided the environment and context also for their critics to rise and publish their works. Among those 10 volumes published in the series Schriften zur wissenschaftlichen Weltauffassung, Karl Popper, who was we shall talk about him in our next meeting, will rise as one of the most sharp critics of logical positivism and its exponents. Published his famous book, Logik der Forschung, which I mentioned at the very beginning, in this very series, as volume 9 in the Schriften zur wissenschaftlichen Weltauffassung. And also Thomas Kuhn, whose famous book, The Structure of Scientific Revolution, is usually seen as a criticism of the logical positivists' approach. As someone said, the last nail in the coffin of logical positivism. Well, this very book, The Structure of Scientific Revolution, was published in 1962 in a new series of books, a huge editorial project which gave rise, was established and started by former members of the Vienna Circle once they moved to the United States. This huge publishing project was the International Encyclopedia of Unified Science, and one of the monographs of the first 2 volumes of this huge project that was never completed, as is often the case with these huge publishing projects. Anyway, one of the monographs comprised or included in this first 2 volumes of the International Encyclopedia of Unified Science was the very structure of scientific revolution. So Popper's Logic of Scientific Discovery and Kuhn's Structure of Scientific Revolutions, both works usually regarded as extremely critical of logical positivism, were published as part of the logical positivists' publishing enterprises.